The smell of Margaret's roast still lingered in that house. Even now, 3 years after we lost her, whenever I walked through that front door on holidays, I could almost convince myself she was still in the kitchen, humming to herself, wearing that ridiculous reindeer apron our daughter Claire had given her as a joke one Christmas. Almost, I was late, not by choice. The highway from Kingston had been a mess. One of those February nights where the snow decides it owns the road and you're just borrowing it. I'd called Claire twice to let her know, but she hadn't picked up. I figured she was busy with the guests, with the food, with everything that goes into hosting a birthday dinner. My birthday dinner, 65 years old, and I was spending it alone in a car on the 401, talking to my dashboard. I didn't mind. Really. I learned to stop minding things I couldn't control after Margaret passed. The grief counselor at the Renfrew County Center, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Okafor, had helped me understand that much. You can't hold water in your fist. You just learn to cup your hands differently. I pulled into Claire's driveway just past 8. The lights were on, warm and yellow through the front window. I could see silhouettes moving inside. I recognized the sound of laughter, even through the door, that sharp, slightly too loud laugh that my son-in-law Derek always made when he thought something was especially clever. I'd heard that laugh at their wedding, at Claire's promotion dinner, at every gathering where Derek was performing his version of himself for an audience. I was still wearing my winter boots on the front step, brushing snow off my shoulders, when I heard his voice cut through the glass. Honestly, best birthday dinner we've had in years. Way more relaxed. You know how he gets always hovering, always making it about Margaret. Claire, this is the first time you've actually seemed like yourself at one of these things. I went still. There was a pause. And then I heard Claire laugh. Not the laugh I knew from when she was a little girl. The one that came up from her belly. This was something quieter, more careful. He means well, she said. He means well, Derek repeated, and I could hear the smile in it. Sûr. But honestly, I'm glad he's late. I hope the roads keep him a while longer. I stood there on the step for a long moment. The cold was working its way through my coat. I looked at my hand on the door handle. That old brass handle that Claire had kept from the original owners because she liked how it felt. She'd told me once. Like a handshake. I let go of it. I walked back to my car, got in, and sat there, in the dark, with the engine running. I want to be honest with you, because that's the only reason I'm telling this story. My first feeling wasn't anger. It was something smaller and more embarrassing than that. It was the particular loneliness of being discussed in a room you were supposed to belong in. I had driven 2.5 hours in a snowstorm for a dinner that, apparently, was better without me. My phone buzzed. A text from Claire Dad. Where are you? Food's getting cold. I stared at it. I typed back. Had to turn around. Roads. Too bad. Happy to reschedule. Enjoy your evening. I drove to a Tim Hortons on the county road and sat in a corner booth with a large double-double and a breakfast sandwich I didn't really taste. The teenager behind the counter had wished me a happy birthday when I'd mentioned offhand that I was supposed to be at a dinner. She'd drawn a little cake on my cup in black marker. I thought about that more than I probably should have. On the drive to the motel I found 6 kilometers down the road. I didn't sleep much that night. The thing about Derek was that I had never disliked him. Exactly. He was the kind of man who was very good at being likable on the surface, quick, with a compliment. Always remembered your drink order. Knew how to work a room. He was in financial services. Managed portfolios for private clients. Drove a Lexus. He leased new every 3 years. He and Claire had met at a conference in Ottawa when she was still working for the provincial government. And when she'd brought him home the first time, Margaret had whispered to me later in the kitchen that he reminded her of a car salesman. I'd told her she was being uncharitable. She'd given me that look, you know the one, and said, "I hope you're right." Margaret was right about most things. What I had noticed over the years, and what I had made a deliberate choice to overlook, was the way Derek framed everything as a transaction. Every favor had an implicit ledger. When I'd helped them with the down payment on their house, $80,000, my contribution to their future, a decision I had made freely and gladly, Derek had immediately begun referring to it, in conversation, as the loan, not a gift. At Christmas the following year, he'd handed me a card with a check inside for $2,000 and called it the first installment. I'd tried to hand it back. He'd insisted. Claire had looked at the floor. I had cashed the check. I had told myself it was simpler that way. What I hadn't known, not until the week after my birthday dinner, was that there had been other transactions I hadn't been consulted about. My nephew Thomas, Claire's cousin, a quiet man who works in accounting in Barrie, called me on a Wednesday evening. He'd heard something from a mutual friend who worked at a credit union in Nepean, and he didn't know whether to tell me, but he'd decided he'd want to know if he were in my position. Derek had applied for a line of credit 18 months earlier, $45,000. He had listed me as a co-signer. I had never signed anything. I drove to the credit union on a Thursday morning with a folder of my financial records and a copy of my will, which I had updated 6 months after Margaret died and which contained, among other things, a provision leaving the house in Renfrew to Claire, outright, no condition. The manager, a careful woman in her 50s named Ms. Beauchamp, sat across from me with an expression that told me she had seen this particular kind of story before. "You're saying you didn't authorize this?" she said. "I'm saying I have never signed anything with this institution." I told her, "I have banked with the same credit union in Renfrew for 31 years. I'd like to know what signature you have on file." What they had on file was a digital authorization that had been submitted through an online portal. My name, my date of birth, my SIN, all correct. The email address attached to the account was one I didn't recognize. Ms. Beauchamp was very professional about it. She walked me through my options. She gave me the name of a fraud specialist at the Ontario Securities Commission. She made a copy of everything I'd brought and gave me a receipt. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. I want to be careful here, because I know how these stories go. I know the version where the father-in-law is the villain, the meddling old man who couldn't let his daughter live her own life. I've thought about that version. I've held it up and looked at it from every angle. And I keep coming back to the same question I asked myself in that parking lot in Nepean. At what point does staying quiet become something worse than speaking up? I called Claire that afternoon. She didn't pick up. I left a message that was, I think, measured. I said I needed to speak with her about something important and time-sensitive, and that I would appreciate a call back before the end of the week. She called back the next morning. "Dad?" she said, and her voice had that particular brightness that I recognized as prepared. "I'm sorry about your birthday. The roads were terrible, and we completely understood, Claire." I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." There was a short silence. "Did you know that Derek applied for a line of credit using my name as a co-signer?" The silence that followed was a different kind. Longer. More specific. "He said it was just a formality." She said finally, "He said it wouldn't affect your credit. He said you'd already agreed to it in principle." I closed my eyes. "When did he tell you this?" "Last spring. We were having some cash flow issues. The investment accounts were down. And he said," she stopped, "Dad, it was only $45,000. He was going to pay it back before you even noticed. before you even noticed. My daughter, my Margaret's daughter, who I had driven to swim practice every Saturday morning for 6 years, who I had helped move 4 times, who I had floated through a rough patch in 2019 without being asked. She had known. Claire? I said, and I tried to keep my voice steady. That's fraud. What he did is fraud. What you're describing is fraud. Dad? Don't be dramatic. I'm going to ask you one more question. I said, and I need you to understand that your answer is going to determine a lot of things. Did you know before he did it? Or did you find out after another silence? Very long. Before, she said quietly. I didn't speak to Claire for 6 weeks after that call. Not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that. I needed time to understand what I was working with. A marriage where your wife conspires with her husband to commit fraud against her own father is not a marriage with a problem. It's a marriage that has become something else entirely, and you have to decide what your relationship to that thing is going to be. I also, during those 6 weeks, did several practical things. I contacted the credit union and began the process of disputing the fraudulent authorization. Ms. Beauchamp connected me with a legal aid resource that specialized in elder financial abuse, a phrase I had some difficulty accepting applied to me, until I thought about it from the outside and accepted that it applied. I called my lawyer in Renfrew, a man named Paul Arsenault, who had handled my affairs since the 90s, and who had the particular quality of being unsurprisable. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Do you want to protect yourself? Or do you want to address the marriage? Just protect myself for now." I said, Paul updated my will. The house in Renfrew was removed from the direct bequest to Claire and placed in a trust with conditions. I didn't do this out of anger. I did it because I was 65 years old, and I had just learned that the people I trusted most with my financial well-being had used that trust as a resource. I needed to be a better steward of what Margaret and I had built together. I also, and this is the part I am least certain I am proud of, wrote Derek a letter. Not a threatening letter. Not an angry letter. A factual one. I laid out what I knew, what the credit union had confirmed, what my legal position was, and what steps I was prepared to take if the line of credit was not repaid in full within 90 days. I mailed it registered post to his office address, not the house. I wanted him to read it at work, where he would have to keep his face composed. I do not know what his face did. Thomas called me in late March. He'd heard through the same channels that Derek and Claire had listed the house. Not sold it yet. Just listed. The Lexus had gone back to the dealership 2 months early. I thought about Derek's voice through that glass door. Way more relaxed. I hope the roads keep him a while longer. I thought about Claire saying he was going to pay it back before you even noticed. There's a particular kind of grief for the living that I hadn't encountered before. Margaret died. Because while she was alive, she handled most of my understanding of our daughter. She translated Claire to me, and me to Claire. Quietly, without either of us fully realizing she was doing it. After Margaret was gone, Claire and I had been finding our way toward each other slowly. Imperfectly. The way you navigate a familiar room in the dark, I had thought we were getting somewhere. I have replayed my birthday dinner 100 times. Not the part on the step, the idea of it. The dinner I didn't attend. Claire actually seeming like herself. Derek said, I wonder what that looked like. I wonder if it was true, or if it was just what he needed to believe. I wonder if Claire, in that moment, had let herself be happy about something that should have made her ashamed. I wonder if she'd thought of me at all, or if she'd let herself not. I sent her a card in April. Not a long message. I wrote, I love you. That hasn't changed. When you're ready to be honest with me about all of it, I'm here. Not before then. I included a photo of her and Margaret from the summer of 2019, the one at the lake, where they're both laughing at something off camera. Margaret's hand on Claire's shoulder. I don't know if she cried. I hope she did. Not to hurt her. Because the Claire I raised knew the difference between what she had and what she had thrown away. And I wanted her to feel the weight of that knowledge. That's not cruelty. That's just hoping your daughter is still in there somewhere. The line of credit was repaid. Not. In 90 days, it took closer to 5 months. And it came in pieces. Not all at once. Which told me they'd had to scramble for it. Paul confirmed receipt of the final payment in July. I signed the paperwork to close the dispute. Ms. Beauchamp sent me a handwritten note. It said, "These situations are never easy. I hope things resolve well for your family." I kept it on my fridge for a while. It seemed like the kind of thing that deserved to be somewhere visible. Claire called me in August. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was in the garden, which Margaret had planted and which I maintained badly but persistently, because it felt important. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice was different from the prepared one. "Smella." "Hi." "Sweetheart," I said. She cried for a while. "You lit her." When she stopped, she said, "I don't have an excuse. I've been trying to write one for months and I can't." I knew it was wrong, and I let him talk me into it, and I knew it was wrong. "I know." I said, "Are you angry?" I thought about that. The snow on the step, the double-double, the birthday cake the teenager had drawn on my cup. I said, "I'm more sad than angry now. I'm sad that you thought that was okay. I'm sad that you thought I wouldn't notice, or that it didn't matter if I did. I'm sad that you were in a position where that felt like a solution." She was quiet. "Are you and Derek?" I started. "We're seeing a counselor," she said. "A financial therapist. I guess they're called. And a regular one? We're trying." "Okay," I said. Are you okay with that?" I looked at the garden. The dahlias Margaret had planted along the back fence were coming up. Somehow, despite everything I'd done wrong with the soil, they were this deep red color that I'd always thought was impractical but had come to love. "I'm not your marriage counselor, Claire," I said. "That's not my call. But I'll tell you what I told you in the card. I love you. I'm here. When you're ready to be honest, fully honest. Not just about the money. I want my daughter back." She said, "I want that too." We talked for another hour. About nothing important. About the garden. About a documentary she'd watched. About a coffee shop in Perth she thought I'd like. It was careful and a little fragile. Like the first weight you put on a bone that's been broken. But it held. I'm telling you this because I know some of you have had a version of this. Maybe it wasn't the money. Maybe it was something said at a dinner table, behind a door, in a voice that assumed you weren't listening. Maybe it was the discovery that someone you loved had decided, quietly and without consulting you, that you were easier to manage than to respect. Here's what I learned at 65. Alone in a Tim Hortons, on a county road, in a snowstorm on my birthday, the people who love you don't measure the cost of you. And the ones who do, you have to decide, calmly and clearly and without bitterness, what your relationship to that accounting is going to be. I didn't stop loving Claire. I don't think I'm capable of that. But I stopped arranging myself around her convenience. And I stopped pretending that love without honesty is anything more than a story we tell to avoid a harder conversation. The dahlias are doing well. By the way, Margaret would have known exactly why. I'm still figuring it out.